All right. Can everyone see my slide with the turtle on it? Okay, great. All right. Well, hello. My name is Amy Smagula, and I'm a freshwater biologist with the Department of Environmental Services, where I coordinate the exotic species program and also do special studies of lakes and ponds across New Hampshire. And tonight, thanks to Christine Musso and Liz Garlow, I was asked to come and do a Weed Watcher training or refresher for both Pleasant Lake and Northwood Lake together. Since you guys both are side by side, it made sense to combine the training for the two lakes. So as I said, the meeting is going to be recorded. We're going to post it on the DES YouTube site, and I will share the link to that with both Christine and Liz so that they can share with the respective lake associations. Just a reminder that if you are unmuted, to mute yourself during the presentation. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. And if your webcam is active, we can see you. So just remember that you are on camera if you choose to use your webcam. And as I said, we will have plenty of time for questions and answers as we come to a close for the slides. So topics to cover during the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about things that will be helpful to you as new or even returning or experienced weed watchers, just to give you a refresher for some things that you should be on the lookout and some helpful tips for how to look for both invasive plants, but also invasive animals in your water body. I'll give you a perspective of the status of infestations in New Hampshire, and then talk about some of the biggest threats to you guys in the Northwood and Deerfield area of the state. I'll review methods for how to weed watch if it's new to you or if you haven't done it for a while, and then the question answers at the end. All right, so one of the first things to start with is thinking about where the plants are in your lake. And I'd like you to each think about standing on your shoreline and looking out across the lake. And I'm going to walk you through the different zones in your water body of the plants that are growing there. And not all of these may be in every part of the lake, but they are different zones that you may encounter. Oh, can you mute?
Your slides are not updating, but now they are, so never mind.
Oh, okay, thank you. So you should be looking at zonation in the lake for a slide. All right, so
Amy, they are not updating automatically. So you can push through slide by slide individually, but you're still stuck on slide 1.
Okay. All right, can you guys see zonation in the lake now? Let's see. Not sure why I'm having.
Yes, we're good now.
They look good. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Very good. Sorry about that. Okay, so the picture of the zonation in the lake, this may look like what you have in front of your properties. It may not. So starting close to shore, and I'm sorry, my voice may go in and out. I was in pollen all day, every day for the last many days, and my allergies are acting up. Emergent plants along shore. So these are the ones that are rooted in the lake sediment, and most of the plant material comes up above the surface of the water. The floating leaf zone is more familiar to folks because it's the place where you tend to see a lot of the lily pads in the lake. And then there's also the submergent or the underwater plants in the lake. So those are mostly underwater. They don't come above the surface. And some of them are rooted or not rooted. So you may see some stuff that sort of rolls around the lake like tumbleweed sometimes. And I'll talk about what those things could be. So I do want you guys to know that we do have historic plant maps for your water bodies. Both Northwood Lake and Pleasant Lake do have historic plant maps available. And I'll tell you where to find these. But what they are is an outline map. So this is Northwood Lake. I'll show you Pleasant in a minute. But it's an outline map of the water body. And it shows you symbols for the different plants that are present in the water body. And then it will also show you what those symbols mean for the little symbols that are there. It'll tell you the plant common name and the plant Latin name. You don't need to worry about the Latin names, but the common names are useful to know. And then I'll show you one for Pleasant Lake. And actually, before I flip, I just want to mention, I want to highlight Northwood Lake has both variable milfoil and Phragmites for invasive plants in it right now. And then switching over to Pleasant Lake, we have fewer plants in this lake because it is deeper than Northwood Lake. And some of the shoreline areas are a little shallower, so you do tend to have plants. Others drop off very quickly in depth, so there are fewer plants. So your list is a little bit shorter. And Pleasant Lake also right now does not have any invasive plants. And I'm putting the big qualifier as yet there. Pleasant Lake is a little bit fortunate in that the boat launch is right next to the dam. So if anything is introduced, it may float right out. Unfortunately, that's bad news for Northwood Lake because Pleasant Lake flows into you. So there could be stuff coming in from upstream. So you guys are both really good where you have a lake host program for early detection, for prevention activities, and you do have weed watcher programs for early detection. So having those layers are really useful and helpful to both water bodies. And I want to highlight for Northwood Lake, just because you have two invasives doesn't mean that there couldn't be others that are growing in the water body as well. So where to find those plant maps? If you go into your search engine, be it Google or whatever it may be, and you type in NHDES Lake Mapper, that will bring up a map of New Hampshire. And then if you zoom in on a water body, here I zoomed in on the Connecticut River as an example. If you click on it, whatever that water body may be, then this little dialog box will pop up and you can click on a whole bunch of reports that DES has available. And one of those would be the lake assessment report. So in the lake assessment report, you will find both the plant map and key, as well as the a depth map and other data of your water body. So that's a good resource for you to have. So again, that's DES Lake Mapper. All you have to do is search for that, and then you can log right into this. All right, so let's take a look at some of the really common plants that you would probably expect to find in both of your water bodies. We're going to start first with the emergent plants. Those are the ones that are close to shore. So rooted in the sediment with most of the plant material up above the surface of the water. Burrweed is one. So I'm going to start in the upper left on each slide and work my way clockwise around the slide. So burrweed is the first one. This is a straight stalked plant. And usually you would know what it is by midsummer when it has these little burr-like seed heads attached to the plant. So that's a really common one. Sedges are really common around lake edges, and they make up a really important matrix of stabilizing roots and vegetative material that help hold the banks of lakes together so that they're not eroding so much. Pipewort is another one. This one is actually an indicator of good water quality. It also is the one that I like to refer to as astroturf because it has little spiky stems and leaves on the lake bottom that almost look like a green carpet sometimes. And they have little stalks with white button-like tips on them. The next one is some rushes. There are lots of rushes around the lake edge, just like sedges. It's a little hard to tell the difference between the two, and for most purposes, you don't need to. But if you roll a rush between your fingers, it's round, and sedges have edges, so they're three-sided. So it's a little rushes are round and sedges have edges. Cattails, these are really common to most people. They have those big cigar-like seed heads attached to the top of a stem, and then a lot of really long sword-like leaves. These are really good filters for nutrients and metals that you might find coming in through runoff and stormwater, and they help filter that right out. And then down here in the bottom left, pickerel weed. This one is not flowering in most places yet, but in another couple weeks, we're going to start to see pale purple flowers coming off from these. These are probably right off your shorefront, rooted. They have leaves that almost look like donkey ears, and then a little pale purple flower that sticks up once the flower forms. And then another really common one on the shoreline is arrowhead. It has these A-shaped or arrow-shaped leaves. Okay, moving on to the floating-leaved plants. These are probably really common to folks. A lot of folks typically associate yellow and white water lilies with lakes and ponds. We have these different types of plants with these big, round, flat, floating leaves, and they are typically anchored to the bottom. So they're rooted, but their leaves float. So white water lily is really common. These have the round leaves with the V-knot shape. They kind of look like the Pac-Man game, the little Pac-Man guy. So I do want to point out that if you see pink water lilies that look like the white ones in terms of shape, the pink ones are not native. That means that somebody planted them either as ornamental value or for some other reason, but only the white ones are native, not the pink ones. The next ones over are floating heart. These are tiny little leaves. They are probably about an inch or two across with a little heart shape to them. They sometimes will produce tiny little white flowers later in the season. Over on the top right is water shield. These are more of an oval shaped leaf. These are really slimy. So if you go to touch them, you'll notice that they have a really slimy texture on the underside that's supposed to be an insect repellent, more or less. Down here, the yellow water lily, these have more of an oval base with a heart-shaped to them. They are probably the first flower that you're going to see on a water body. These really start growing right after ice out, and then they'll send up their flower usually by early May in a lot of cases. And then pondweeds, these are really common. We have a lot of different types of pondweeds in New Hampshire, and these are typical of most water bodies. And then moving into the really tricky ones, and I say tricky because a lot of these tend to look alike, and a lot of these have invasive plants that look a lot like them. So the natives are typically what we view as good, and everything that I've shown you so far is native, favorable, desirable species in our lakes and ponds. I'm going to switch in a minute to show you the invasives, but I just wanted to show you what's normal and natural in your water bodies. So again, starting in the top left here, bladderwort, it's an interesting name, but it is a really common floating aquatic plant, but it's an underwater plant. And by floating, I mean it's not truly rooted to the lake bottom. And what you may see is that this one is going to drift around like tumbleweeds in the lake. So you'll see bladderwort floating. Bladderwort's a carnivore, so it functions like a plant, but it also has little brownish or blackish seed heads on it, and those are bellies. So those will capture and digest microscopic organisms in the water body and use those for nutrition in addition to photosynthesizing like a plant. So it's a pretty neat adaptation. The next one over is coontail. This one has leaves that are whorled around the stem and they're sort of splitting or branching in pattern. And then as you get up to the tip of the plant, the leaves get more closely packed together, so it looks like a tail. Over here on the top right is another bladderwort species. This one has leaves that are whorled. It's whorled bladderwort. and it tends to have greenish or whitish bladders as opposed to the other bladderwort, which has brownish or blackish bellies on it. Water naiad, these are like needle-like leaves clustered around the little stems. Really low grower. You'll find this one really close to the lake bottom. It's very brittle, so you may see pieces of this floating around your lake. This one is an underwater pondweed. It's a little hard to see, but it actually looks like a feather frond or an ostrich fern, and it is very close to the bottom. I do want to point out a native milfoil. We actually have 6 species of native milfoils in New Hampshire, and they are totally fine. They're well behaved. They don't grow out of control. This one here usually only gets about 6 inches tall, and it forms just a little cluster of plants on the lake bottom, and they tend to be reddish or brownish. So native milfoil. This one is ribbon-like. It looks like fettuccine noodles, if you will, and it is called tape grass. It also looks like ribbons in the water. This one's kind of fun. It has these little corkscrew-like growths that grow up to the surface of the water in the middle of the summer. Those are actually the reproductive structures of the plant. So if you ever see little corkscrew plants coming up through the bottom to the top of the water column, it could be tape grass if there are tape-like leaves associated with it. And then waterweed over here. Waterweed has boom and bust cycles. So they tend to have years where they're really abundant and then years where they are less abundant. And then those are some really common examples of underwater plants that you could typically see in most water bodies. And I do want to point out algae since it is that time of year. So when you're looking in the lake and you see these big green clouds or cotton candy-like growth, that is typically okay. That's filamentous green algae, and it's very normal, even though it can look kind of alarming. What we really worry about is when you start to see scums or these bathtub rings around the lake edge, or the whole lake turning a blue-greenish or greenish color. Now, we are in pollen season, so excluding the yellow pollen, this is typically more of a greenish color scum. So if you see anything like that, let us know because it could be cyanobacteria. And we worry about that because it can produce liver toxins and neurotoxins. So we do want to know about that. All right, so for Northwood and Deerfield, on your high watch list species are for plants, variable milfoil, brittle naiad, and Phragmites or common reed. And I'll show you pictures of these. And then also some animals. And for many years, we only used to talk about plants. That's why we had the Weed Watcher program, but it's sort of evolved into a whatever watching program. And I got to come up with a better name for it because it's almost looking for plants and animals, but also algae. It's sort of whatever watching in your water body. So Asian clam, spiny water flea, and Chinese mystery snail are some of the animals that you should be on the lookout for while you are watching in your water bodies. And again, I'll show you pictures of all of those. So I'm going to start and go through the same way that I did with the native plants. I'm going to talk about the emergent plants on shore first and then work my way out deeper. So the first one is purple loosestrife. So remember when you're weed watching to not only look in the water, but look on shore as well. Purple loosestrife doesn't typically grow in the water. It likes moist feet, but not wet feet. So it'll be up on the banks. And the stems of the plant are square and the leaves are opposite or sometimes whorled. And then as we get into end of July, early August, you're going to start to see these purple spikes coming up off the plants if you do have purple loosestrife in your area. And they're really like a magenta purple, not a pale purple, but more of a pinky purple color. So keep an eye out for those. And then common reed, I know that there are spots on Northwood Lake that have this. Pleasant Lake, you are just as susceptible to this one because of roads that go around your lake. Phragmites typically likes to come in along the margins of roadways, and it establishes these little stands. The plants can be anywhere from 5 to 10 feet tall, so they get really big. And then they have these sword-like leaves and then these brown, fluffy seed heads later in the season. Now that typically is along a roadway. You put that next to a lake and you have the stand that's starting, either coming in from a culvert or just creeping along a roadside. And then they send out all these little runners and they progress into the water body, and every place where these touch down, the plant anchors and then a new stalk will grow up. So I've seen places like not so far away over in Pawtuckaway Lake in Nottingham, these plants have created islands in the shallows of that lake. So it is a very aggressive, emergent invasive plant. So keep an eye out for these spreading in the water body. There's only one floating leaved invasive plant that I'm going to highlight, and that's water chestnut. So this one you would typically find mixed in with the lily pads. Luckily, it doesn't look anything like a lily pad. It has triangular shaped leaves that have teeth on them, and then they form this cluster or rosette, and that floats on the surface of the water, anchored and rooted to the bottom. And then it produces these little seeds on the underside of the leaves. And this is what it does. This is a very full infestation of water chestnut covering multiple acres in a water body. And there's another picture of that rosette. So just keep an eye out for that. This plant spreads by seed. So fragments of the plant are not going to spread it. The seed is what's going to spread it. And we have seen the seeds attached to carpeted bunks of boat trailers. And we've also seen them attached to the breast feathers of birds. So any place where you tend to have waterfowl on your water body, which in some cases is everywhere, but sometimes they congregate in areas, but also near the boat launch first. This could be introduced from seed. So it's an easy one to spot because it's a little different looking. Unfortunately, not easy to spot because these fall into the category of looking like a lot of the natives. I'm going to just say, when in doubt, have it checked. You can certainly send me specimens for ID, and I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. But variable milfoil is one of your biggest threats. We know it's in Northwood Lake, but we also know that it's pretty widespread across New Hampshire. This one is a very full plant. The stem can be red or green or brown, but they always have these really fluffy leaves along the main stem. And milfoils have leaves that look like feathers on a bird. So if you look at these and then they're whirled around the main stem, those are some classic characteristics. Variable milfoil can grow several feet tall. I've seen it as tall as 15 feet tall in some water bodies. And I've also seen it growing down 30 feet deep in really clear water bodies. That's what it looks like when it's in the water. These big, fluffy, tubular shaped plants. These are flower stalks. The plant doesn't really need to produce flowers, mainly because it can spread by fragmentation. So a little piece of this plant can break off, grow this little hair-like root, and that will settle and grow and form additional plants. A couple more pictures. Fanwort. This one is not a high priority for your two water bodies, but I just wanted to highlight it because it's south of you, mostly along the southern tier of New Hampshire, but it is one to be aware of. Instead of feather-like leaves, it has fan-shaped leaves, so fanwort, and they're branching. They're not feather-like, and they're opposite on the main stem. And you can see here the main stem. They also have this little stem from the main stem, so they're stalked leaves and perfectly opposite. And that's what it looks like underwater. It looks a lot like milfoil when you see it in the water. So it's always a good idea to get a piece of this plant and take a look at it in hand and see if you can differentiate it from the other invasives. Curly-leaf pondweed is spreading in New Hampshire, so I wanted to highlight it. It has these they're not curly leaves, but they're extremely wavy. So if you think about the edge of a lasagna noodle, it kind of looks like that. And it's very crisp and green like lettuce. Yes, I use a lot of food analogies. And it's a low grower, so a foot or two tall. So it's not a whole water column plant. It's just a fairly short grower. Brittle naiad, also called water naiad or southern or European naiad. It has a lot of common names, but this one is a little different than our native water naiads. It has teeth on the edges of the leaves, and the leaves bend backwards. So if you see anything that looks like that, it could be the invasive water naiad, very low growing, usually only about 6 inches tall to a foot tall on the bottom of the water body. And then hydrilla is a good one to highlight because it is not in New Hampshire yet, and it strikes fear in the heart of biologists. This plant is a monster. We call it hydrilla, the lake killer. It can grow 25 feet tall, and it can grow in dark water and take over very quickly. It's extremely brittle, so it will fragment and spread. And then this tuber down here can also be spread by waterfowl. So it's as close to us as Maine and Massachusetts. Luckily, it's not next door in Vermont yet, but it's all throughout the other New England states. New Hampshire and Vermont so far have not seen it. It looks a lot like our native Elodea. If you look closely at it, it does have teeth on the edges of the leaves so that you can sort of differentiate it. Another really key factor is that if you look at the number of leaves in a whorl, native waterweed only has 3 or less. The invasives have 4 or more. So if you count the leaves in a whorl and they're almost consistently 4 or more, and they have teeth on them, it could be hydrilla. So it's a good one to watch out for. All right, moving into some invasive animals now. The first one is Asian clam. And both Northwood and Pleasant Lake do have some areas that are very sandy. And these Asian clam love sandy substrates. So they are going to take over in areas like sandy beaches in the water or sandy shorefronts. And they can grow a couple to a few feet deep. And you'll see them in the near shore zone. Sometimes they'll burrow into the sediment, so you have to use a sieve to dig them out, but they're fairly small. They get to be about the size of a dime, sometimes the size of a quarter around, but no bigger than that. And they can be yellow or brown or kind of tannish. The thing about these is that they have, they're kind of rounded, and then they have these very defined ridges on the shells. So if you find something with those characteristics, then it could be the Asian clam. We worry about that because they can create all these shells on the bottom of a lake, which can be really aggravating when you step on them. But they can also be highly disruptive to fish nesting and cause problems for fish reproductive cycles by taking over and filling up these beds. Asian clam have microscopic larvae, so they can be introduced by any water-containing devices, bilges, bait buckets, live wells, anything like that. And it only takes one. Asian clam are hermaphroditic, so they have both male and female parts in their shell. So even one getting into a water body can create a population. So we do have 7 water bodies in New Hampshire with the Asian clam. They are mostly southern, but they do include lakes and rivers. The Chinese mystery snail, this one is really big. So think about the size of a golf ball. It is a gigantic snail. Most of our native snails are so small, you probably don't even know that they're in the water body. And they are usually down on the bottom, and you'll see them attached to rocks or on the sediment. So they're very obvious. They've been in New Hampshire for several decades now, and they are in several dozen water bodies across the state. And then the zebra mussel, we do not have this one yet. It is a small mussel. So most of our native mussels are a couple inches long to a few inches long and oval. The zebra mussel is only about the size of a pistachio nut, and it's D-shaped. So it's got a flat side and then it arcs out in a D shape. And then it has these little sticky strands that come out of the shell, and that allows them to stick to surfaces. So with the Asian clam, that's the one you would see on the bottom, just littering the bottom. The zebra mussel will stick to things. It'll stick to your docks, your boats, black pipes in the water, any hard surface. They'll stick to native mussels, whoops, and they will stick to each other. So any little sticky mussel is definitely cause for alarm. And then the last one I'm going to show you is spiny water flea. These are not in New Hampshire yet, but they're in Lake Champlain in Vermont. They are tiny. So this is somebody's finger, and this is the swivel and a fishing line. So these are spread a lot by fishing line. They do foul fishing line and stick to it, and then they get introduced into new water bodies. They are small in size, but big in impact, because this is a glass or silica tail, and that will get stuck in the mouth parts and digestive tracts of organisms that eat these, like fish and other aquatic life. So they could cause digestive problems and ultimately fish stunting and other impacts. So also spread by just drops of water. So a state of the state, so you have perspective. New Hampshire has over 90 water bodies now with some type of invasive species. 11 of those are river systems. The rest are lakes and ponds. And this isn't a mistake. It's not like we don't look up here or map up here. It's just that we haven't found any infestations in that part of New Hampshire yet. All of our infestations are in the bottom half of the state. Most of them, all those red dots, are the variable milfoil. And then we have a scattering of other plants and animals, as you see here. So that is the state of the state. And if we were to zoom in and look at the Northwood and Deerfield area of the state, you see that you are mostly surrounded by variable milfoil. So those are your nearest closest risk, assuming boaters come from the general vicinity. We know that they come from beyond too, but nearby lakes could pose a risk for people that hop between lakes. Other things sort of near you, the brittle naiad is over in Milton. Eurasian water milfoil, which I didn't mention because it's not a high risk to you guys, is up in Brookfield. And then down here in the southern part of the state is fanwort. So mostly variable milfoil in your area. All right, so weed watching. This is a really important program. The more eyes, the better on a water body. And because of the sheer fact that you guys live on a water body and recreate on a water body, you guys are the experts of your water body. You notice when things change. You notice when the water looks different. You notice when the plants are a little bit more abundant than they used to be. So that is hugely valuable for detecting something new. We've had lake residents find new infestations at a single stem level. They've found one plant. So that is tremendous. But having a weed watcher program is a proactive approach. It allows you to catch infestations early and then report them so that a rapid response can happen. And that will allow the spread to be contained and not take over the whole lake. And again, just because Northwood Lake has variable milfoil and some Phragmites doesn't mean that something else won't come in, or now that we've gotten the milfoil under control, that it won't spread again. So having extra eyes on the water body is key. And same applies for Pleasant Lake, where if you're looking for an invasive plant and you find it early, we can head off a whole lake infestation. So weed watching is easy. You don't need to be a botanist or a biologist to do it. All you need to do is learn the plants that I showed you in the slideshow tonight, and then just volunteer to monitor a portion of your water body once a month from May through September. And then just Volunteer to a section, survey that section from shore out to where you can't see bottom anymore, and then look for the invasives. It's going to seem pretty daunting at first because you might not know what the plants are, but with repetition, it becomes easier. And I am here to help you if you find something suspicious. We do provide weed watcher kits, and those have methods, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. They have pictures of key invasive species, including laminated sheets of plants and animals to help you with ID, fact sheets, and then I already mentioned where to find existing plant maps and keys so you know what's familiar. I also believe that we've created personal, I guess I can call them pictorials for both of your lakes, where we have colored photos of the plants on those plant lists that I showed you so that you know exactly what you have, and then you can start looking for the invasives. I like to think of it as setting a filter and learning the natives and ignoring them, and then honing in on anything that's invasive. So when you're weed watching on the water, I would like to say most of you have already, well, both of you, both lakes, have already broken the lakes up into sections. If it's been a while since you've revisited how your lake is broken up into weed watcher sections, it might be a good idea to do that. But everyone should have a bite-sized chunk that wants to participate. And you can do this in any type of vessel, power boat, pontoon boat, canoe, kayak, paddleboard. Some volunteers swim or scuba dive or snorkel, whatever you're comfortable with to get you out there. And when you're on the water, you want to start at one end of your shoreline and go back and forth to cover as much area from shore out to where you can't see bottom anymore. And you can do it either way. It's zigzag this way or zigzag the long way. But if you do that once a month from May through September, you should find something if it's there. And I would recommend scanning the surface to look for floating pieces of plants and scan the bottom to look for rooted plants and any animals that may be down there. I like to do it when the sun is high so that I can see in the water and it's illuminated by the sun. And I also like to wear a hat and I wear polarized sunglasses. Those really help to cut the glare on the surface of the water. And it's also good to go out when the lake is calm. And you each know when your lake gets stirred up or riled up from a lot of boat traffic or wind, and how hard it is to see. So try to find a calm time to go out and do your weed watching. And remember, when you're close to shore, look up at shore for any of those emergent plants that may not be in the water, but that are close to the shoreline edge. So those are the basic methods. And what you're looking for is anything that is new or out of place. It wasn't there last month. It wasn't there last year. It looks new or bigger or growing or multiplying quickly. Anything that appears to be growing and taking over an area, bigger each month. For plants, a lot of times invasive plants will send a lot of fragments around. So if you start to see a lot of the same fragment drifting around, it could be an invasive plant. And if you see a lot of new animals accumulating in high number on the bottom, it could be some type of invasive animal, either on the bottom or sticking to something. If you find something, mark it in some way, make note of where it is. So you can either use a float of some type or just note a reference on shore. And if you can, carefully collect a voucher specimen. If it's an animal, only take one because there are rare animals out there and we want to make sure that we're not taking too many. And all I need is one for ID. You can also take a photograph of it and put it back in case it is a rare species. If it's a plant, collect a representative piece of the plant and any seeds or fruit. And then what you do with that is the best option, only because it's quickest, is to take a digital picture of it and you just lay that on a piece of white paper towel or a piece of paper, arrange it so that I can see the leaves or the flowers or any particular orientation of the animal so I can see its shell. Put a coin or pen or ruler next to it so I have some type of scale. and then take a digital picture of it and email it to me. I usually check my email through the day, even if I'm in the field, so I can let you know what it is right away. Another alternative is to wrap it in a moist paper towel, put it in a Ziploc bag and mail it to me at DES, or you can drop it by if you come through Concord. So this is quickest because I'm often on the road, especially during the growing season, but this is an alternative that I will catch up with once or twice a week. If you do find something that's invasive, I will let you know, and then I will come out and survey your water body and map it and then determine the best course of action. I also encourage you that if you think it's native, you just want to know what it is, feel free to email me pictures of those too. I'm here to help you learn the plants and the animals in your water body, and I'm happy to do IDs for you. More for the fact that if it is an invasive, we want to catch it quickly. So don't hesitate to just check in and say, just tell me what this is. I'm curious about it or I'm worried about it. So the methods are simple. Here is my email address. If you are interested in getting a weed watcher kit and you don't have one, feel free to email me with your mailing address. And if you could use street address, unfortunately, our UPS does not deliver to PO boxes. So a street address would be great. I'll get that out to you. But other than that, I am done the slides. So I am happy to take questions that you guys may have. And feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions out loud, or you can chat. Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, Amy. Thanks so much. That was wonderful. We do find that Chinese mystery snail on Pleasant Lake, and when we do weed watching, we don't see them as often, but we still see them. Should we just be leaving them in place, or like we know that they're invasive? So I guess what do we do when we find them?
Yep. So if they're in reach and they're accessible, I tell people to just grab them and take them out of the lake. That's fewer to reproduce each year. So you can do that individually around the lake. There are also lakes out there who do like a Chinese mystery snail roundup, where associated with their annual meeting, they'll have kids go out and collect some Chinese mystery snails and give the kid with the most number a gift card for ice cream or something like that. So you could have like a goal-oriented, focused activity, or individually you can pick them up as you see them. And then you can either toss them deep in the woods or toss them in the trash, either way.
Okay, thanks. That's what we've been doing, but not the gift card part. So I like that.
Just a suggestion.
Another question on our recent watch, I think in May, we saw a rather large down tree, and I think we told Liz about it, but what do we do for stuff like that? I mean, it's pretty significant tree fall, so.
Yep. Yeah, we lost a lot of trees this past
Yeah.
winter. The winds lately are just ridiculous. So I would just check in with the Wetlands Bureau. They like to be notified if any removal is going to happen. It doesn't hurt to leave them in place. However, if they are a navigation or swim or safety hazard, they probably should be removed. But just check in with the Wetlands Bureau at DES and see if they have any recommendations or if a permit's required for getting in there and pulling it out.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. I've also seen some lakes just kind of lasso them and then pull them closer to shore and anchor them so they don't drift deeper until they can be chopped up and removed.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions? All right, you guys are an easy group tonight. I am going to save this recording, and then once it's available, probably early next week, because I have to have somebody in our public information office post it to the website. But once it's ready, I'll let you guys know. And just a reminder to email me if you want those weed watcher kits. And never hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good night, and hopefully we get some good weather soon.
Thank you.
Consistent good weather.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.